Hook, a federal agent, fires his weapon in a crowded Minneapolis neighborhood. A Venezuelan migrant lies wounded. And a nation's explosive debate over immigration and law enforcement just detonated on a single street corner. This isn't just another police shooting. This is a flashpoint. Some see a federal officer defending himself from a violent assault. Others see a system targeting vulnerable immigrants. Who's right? The answer could reshape policies, communities, and lives. We're diving deep for the next 12 minutes. Context and background to understand this moment, you need the timeline. On the afternoon of May 15, 2024, two U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, part of a fugitive operations team, attempted to arrest a 32-year-old Venezuelan national in the city's Whittier neighborhood. The man was subject to a final order of removal, meaning a judge had already ordered his deportation. According to official statements, the encounter quickly turned physical. The suspect allegedly assaulted one of the ICE agents with a sharp object, described in initial reports as a shard of glass or a makeshift blade. The assaulted agent then discharged his service weapon, striking the suspect. The man was transported to a local hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. No other civilians or officers were hurt, but here's the crucial context. This happens against a backdrop of intense national friction. Minneapolis is a sanctuary city, with local policies limiting cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. ICE operations here are inherently tense. Furthermore, the suspect is part of a massive wave of Venezuelan migrants who have arrived in the U.S. in recent years, fleeing economic and political collapse. Many, like this individual, have pending asylum claims or removal orders, living in a legal limbo. This incident also follows a painful history for Minneapolis, a city still grappling with the legacy of the police killing of George Floyd just miles away. So when a federal officer shoots a migrant, it's not an isolated event. It's a collision of immigration policy, sanctuary city rules, use of force protocols, and deep community trauma. The stage was set for conflict long before the shot was fired. The claim side, let's start with the perspective of law enforcement and its supporters. Their core claim is straightforward. This was a justified use of force in defense of a life. Proponents point to the official narrative from ICE and Homeland Security investigations. They argue the agents were executing a lawful judicial order. The individual was not randomly targeted. He had a final deportation order. Supporters argue the agents had no choice but to engage. The violent escalation, they say, came solely from the suspect. The key piece of evidence is the sharp object. An agent faced with an edged weapon in a close-quarters struggle has mere seconds to react. The use of deadly force is authorized under federal policy to prevent death or serious bodily injury. The officer was attacked, they state. His response was a direct reaction to an imminent threat. But wait, there's another side to this story. We'll get to that. First, let's hear more from Side A. They highlight the dangerous nature of fugitive operations. These aren't traffic stops. They're often targeting individuals with criminal histories or who have already evaded deportation. Agents operate with constant risk. Supporters ask a pointed question: what was the agent supposed to do? Allow himself to be stabbed or slashed? They see this as a clear-cut case of self-defense, obscured by politics. They also point to a broader issue: the challenges of enforcing immigration law in non-cooperative jurisdictions. Sanctuary city policies, they argue, force ICE into more volatile, proactive arrests in the community, rather than safer transfers from local jails. This, they claim, increases risk for everyone involved, agents and suspects alike. The takeaway from this side? A federal officer did his difficult job, was assaulted, and followed his training to survive. End of story. The counter side B, but critics, however, see it differently. From this angle, the incident is a symptom of a broken and brutal system. Their central claim: this was a preventable escalation, highlighting the excessive and traumatic nature of ICE enforcement, particularly in immigrant communities. Opponents counter that the very presence of ICE fugitive teams in a sanctuary city is provocative and undermines local community safety goals. Advocacy groups and community leaders in Minneapolis immediately question the necessity of the operation. They ask, was this individual, with a final order, such a dire public safety threat that an armed arrest operation was required? Or was this a routine immigration violation met with a disproportionate, militarized response? Critics point out that the sharp object has not been fully detailed or publicly evidenced, urging caution before accepting the agency's own justification for a shooting it is investigating. The other side argues that this incident must be viewed through the lens of fear. For many immigrants, ICE agents are seen not as police, but as a deportation force. An encounter with them represents family separation, detention, and expulsion. In that state of panic, critics argue resistance, even irrational, dangerous resistance, can be a terrified reaction, not a premeditated assault. They ask, did de-escalation tactics fail? Were language barriers a factor? Could a different approach have avoided violence altogether? Skeptics also highlight the long, documented history of ICE and CBP agents using excessive force. They point to lawsuits and watchdog reports detailing abuses. For them, this isn't an isolated case of self-defense. It's a pattern of aggression embedded within an agency whose core mission creates confrontational scenarios. The community impact, they stress, is profound. This shooting sends a wave of terror through immigrant neighborhoods, making people afraid to report crimes, go to work, or send their kids to school, all in the name of enforcement. The evidence, what data shows, so who's right? Let's look at the evidence and step back from the heated rhetoric. What do the numbers actually say? First, the data on ICE shootings is sparse but telling. A 2023 analysis by a non-partisan research group found that ICE and CBP officers discharge their weapons far less frequently than typical municipal police officers. However, when they do, the circumstances are almost exclusively during enforcement operations, like arrests or pursuits, rather than routine calls. This suggests a high-risk operational environment. But experts note that the lack of comprehensive, transparent national data on use of force by federal immigration agents makes full analysis difficult. ICE's own internal investigations are not subject to the same public scrutiny as many local police departments. Second, let's examine the context of Venezuelan migrants. Over 200,000 Venezuelans have been encountered at the U.S. border in the past year alone. The U.S. has granted temporary protected status to many, but the system is backlogged by years. Data shows that a final order of removal does not necessarily mean someone is a criminal. It often means they lost their asylum case or failed to appear in an overwhelmed court system. International comparisons are stark. In other developed nations, immigration enforcement is typically handled by specialized police, not armed agents with arrest and deportation powers, leading to different models of engagement. Third, expert analysis on sanctuary policies presents a mixed picture. Studies from criminologists have generally found that sanctuary city policies do not increase crime and can actually improve community safety by fostering trust between local police and immigrant residents. However, they also create a jurisdictional clash, forcing federal agents to work without local intelligence, potentially making operations more dangerous. The data suggests the core conflict is systemic, a federal mandate to enforce immigration laws colliding with local policies designed to integrate immigrant communities. The shooting in Minneapolis is a violent manifestation of that data point. The verdict, your analysis, the reality is more complex than either side fully admits. Here's the uncomfortable synthesis. The evidence likely supports that the agent was, in a narrow, legal sense, justified. Facing an edged weapon in a physical struggle meets the threshold for use of deadly force in virtually any police policy manual. To expect an officer to not defend himself in that moment is unrealistic. However, what most people miss is the chain of decisions that led to that split-second moment. The verdict isn't just on the trigger pull, it's on the operation itself. Was the planning adequate? Were de-escalation tactics the priority? In a sanctuary city with a traumatized community, does the tactical approach need rethinking? The uncomfortable truth is that both narratives contain hard truths. Yes, officers have a right to defend themselves. And yes, the ICE enforcement model creates predictable, volatile encounters that terrify communities and too often end in tragedy. This incident isn't an anomaly. It's an inevitability of the current system. The nuance lies in recognizing that a legally justified shooting can still be a systemic failure. It highlights the absurdity of using armed agents to handle what is, for most of those arrested, a civil immigration violation. The system sets up a confrontation between a person fearing the destruction of their life and an agent fearing for his physical safety. In that dynamic, violence is a predictable outcome, and declaring a simple good guy versus bad guy winner misses the profound policy failure at play. Impact and what's next. So how does this affect ordinary people? First, for the immigrant community in Minneapolis and cities like it, the impact is a deepening chill. Trust erodes further. Parents will be more fearful. People will withdraw from public life, harming local economies and community cohesion. For the agent and his colleagues, it's a traumatic event that reinforces a siege mentality. For the public, it's another log on the fire of a polarized debate, making calm, rational reform seem impossible. What to watch for now: the internal ICE investigation is key, but its findings may not be public for months. The local county attorney is reviewing for potential criminal charges against the agent, a rare but possible step. A federal civil rights lawsuit from the suspect is almost guaranteed. Politically, this will be used as a rallying cry by conservatives to demand tougher enforcement and an end to sanctuary cities, and by progressives to demand the abolition of ICE or drastic reform. Watch for legislative moves at both the state and federal level, attempting to either compel cooperation with ICE or further restrict their activities. Conclusion: with engagement hook, so we're left with the central debate: lawful self-defense or systemic brutality. A necessary enforcement action or a preventable tragedy? Now I want to hear from you. Are you Team A or Team B? Drop a comment below. What do you think? Drop a 1 if you believe this was a justified use of force by an assaulted agent. Drop a 2 if you believe this highlights the excessive force of a broken immigration system. Let's have the debate. Share this with someone who needs to see both sides of this story. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more breaking news and deep dive analysis from around the world. Word count: 1802.